Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going back in time to a pretty important moment in American history.
Pivotal.
Yeah, the War of 1812.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know it as the Second War of Independence, but
Right.
we've got some sources here that
Yeah.
are going to reveal why that nickname really is accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to go beyond just dates and battles
Yeah.
and uncover the complex factors that led to this war
Right.
and explore how this relatively short conflict had this ripple effect
Yep.
on America's identity,
Yeah.
its journey westward, and even its standing on the world stage.
It's fascinating to think that a war fought over 200 years ago is still shaping America today. So first things first, what lit the fuse on this powder keg?
Right.
It wasn't just a simple rematch
Yeah.
of the
Right.
Revolutionary War, right?
Right. It was a culmination of simmering tensions that finally reached a boiling point.
Okay.
One major irritant was British interference with American shipping.
Okay.
They imposed these things called Orders in Council,
Orders in Council.
essentially strong-arming American ships to dock in Britain before they could trade with other European nations.
That's like being told you have to make an extra pit stop on your raid trip just because someone else says so.
Right.
Did the British have a reason for doing this?
Well, they were locked in a major struggle with Napoleon
Mm-hmm.
and saw this as a way to cripple France's economy.
Okay.
The Orders in Council aimed to control trade and prevent goods from reaching their enemy.
So American merchants were caught in the crossfire?
Yeah.
It wasn't just inconvenient, but it also
Yeah.
cut into their profit.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about the added stops. The British were also seizing American ships and goods, claiming they were ultimately destined for impressment was a huge slap in the face
Yeah.
to American sovereignty.
Mm.
Imagine being ripped away from your home
Right.
and forced to fight for a foreign power against your will.
Yeah.
It was a major point of contention
Right.
and a stark reminder that Britain didn't fully respect America's independence.
So we've got economic warfare, blatant disregard for American sailors, but were there also internal pressures within the U.S. pushing for war?
Definitely remember the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
That massive land grab in 1803 doubled the size of the U.S.,
Right.
opening up vast territories for westward expansion.
Yeah.
But it also fueled tensions with Native American tribes
Right.
who already inhabited these lands and intensified the desire for even more territory.
So it seems like this drive for westward expansion was a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On one hand, it represented American ambition and potential. On the other, it led to conflicts with Native Americans and the British,
Yeah,
who still had a significant presence in North America.
precisely.
Yeah.
And then we have the War Hawks, a group of young, fiery congressmen,
Uh-huh.
mostly from the South and West,
Yeah.
who were eager to defend American honor and expand its borders.
Okay.
Figures like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun championed this cause,
Okay.
fueled by a potent mix of nationalism and a belief in America's destiny.
So they weren't just reacting to British actions.
Right.
They also saw war as an opportunity. What exactly were they hoping to achieve?
Well, some war hawks genuinely believed it was time to finally kick the British out of North America altogether
Wow.
and seize Canada. Others saw it as a chance to secure American trading rights and prove to the world that the U.S. was a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
It was a blend of idealism, ambition, and a thirst for proving American strength.
It's interesting to see how all those different motivations came together to
Yeah.
create this powerful push for war.
Right.
So it was a perfect storm
Yeah.
of external pressures from Britain and internal forces within the U.S. that finally led to the declaration of war in June of 1812. What was the initial reaction from Britain?
Well, at that time, Britain was completely embroiled in the Napoleonic Wars.
Uh-huh.
They were caught a bit off guard by America's declaration, and their primary focus remained on defeating Napoleon.
Okay.
This actually gave the U.S. a bit of an advantage in the
Mm.
early stages of the war.
So were the Americans able to capitalize on this and secure any early victories?
It was a mixed bag.
Okay.
The early American attempts to invade Canada actually failed miserably.
Oh.
They faced logistical nightmares and fierce resistance from both British and Canadian forces.
That doesn't sound like the grand victory the War Hawks were hoping for.
Not exactly, but there was a silver lining.
Okay.
The U.S. managed to pull off some significant naval victories on the Great Lakes, which was a much-needed morale boost. The Battle of Lake Erie, for example,
Okay.
was a crucial win that gave the U.S. control of this key waterway.
So at least there were some early signs of American strength, especially on the water.
Yeah.
But the British weren't just going to sit back and watch, were they?
No, of course not.
If
They retaliated with the blockade of the U.S. coast,
Oh.
which threw a wrench into American trade.
Okay.
It caused economic hardship, especially in New England, which relied heavily on maritime commerce.
So while the U.S. was finding its footing on the Great Lakes,
Yeah.
the British were squeezing them economically. This conflict was really starting to heat up, and I'm guessing this is where some of those legendary battles you mentioned come into play.
You got it. Get ready for some dramatic twists and turns, because these battles didn't just determine the course of the war,
Right.
they shaped the future of the United States. Let's talk about the Battle of Tippecanoe.
This is the one where William Henry Harrison, a future president, really made a name for himself, right?
Exactly. Harrison led American forces to victory against Tecumseh's Confederacy, a powerful alliance of Native American tribes who were allied with the British.
This battle seems like a key turning point, not just for the war, but for Harrison's career and for the future of westward expansion.
Absolutely. It dealt a major blow to Native American resistance in the Northwest Territory and further fueled the idea that American expansion westward was inevitable, even divinely ordained. It's a powerful example of how a single battle can have ripple effects far beyond the immediate conflict.
It's almost like this battle helped pave the way for the concept of manifest destiny that would take hold in the decades following the war.
You're exactly right. The victory at Tippecanoe solidified Harrison's status as a war hero and set the stage for his future political success, all while feeding into this growing sense of American exceptionalism and the belief in its right to expand westward.
So we have one future president making his mark at Tippecanoe, and now we have another future president, Andrew Jackson, leading American forces to victory at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814. This one was down south, right?
That's right. Jackson was a fierce and determined leader, and his victory at Horseshoe Bend against the Creek Nation was crucial in securing American control of the South. It further weakened Native American resistance and essentially opened up the floodgates for westward expansion in that region.
These battles really highlight the complex and often tragic relationship between the U.S. government and Native American tribes during this era. It's a side of the war that we can't afford to overlook.
Absolutely. It's essential to understand that while the War of 1812 is often framed as a conflict between the U.S. and Great Britain, Native American tribes were deeply involved and paid a heavy price. Their alliances with both sides underscore the complex power dynamics at play during this period.
And then, in a move that must have really shaken the young nation, the British captured and burned Washington, D.C. in 1814. I can only imagine the shock and outrage that must have swept through the country.
It was a humiliating blow, no doubt about it. The White House, the Capitol building, all reduced to ashes. But this act of aggression had an unexpected consequence.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. How did burning down the Capitol actually backfire on the British?
Well, instead of crushing American morale, it ignited a wave of patriotism and defiance. It was a rallying cry that unified Americans against a common enemy. Suddenly, everyone was focused on pushing back the British and defending their nation.
So from the ashes of defeat rose a stronger, more determined American spirit. It's incredible how a moment of vulnerability can actually become a source of strength.
It really is. And this newfound spirit of resilience was on full display just a year later at the Battle of Baltimore. Despite a relentless bombardment by the British Fort McHenry, held strong, inspiring Francis Scott Key to pen the Star-Spangled Banner.
Talk about turning a moment of adversity into a symbol of national pride. That song would go on to become the American national anthem, forever cementing the Battle of Baltimore in American history and memory. It's amazing how a single event can have such a lasting impact.
It speaks volumes about the power of symbolism and how shared experiences, even those rooted in conflict, can forge a sense of national identity. In the face of British aggression, Americans found unity and purpose, and that spirit resonated through the generations.
Okay, so we have early victories on the Great Lakes, a devastating blow to the Capitol, and then a heroic stand at Baltimore that inspired the national anthem. What else can you tell us about the key battles of this war?
Well, we can't forget about the Battle of New Orleans, which took place in January of 1815. This was a decisive American victory, led by none other than Andrew Jackson, who was quickly becoming a legend.
Wait, 1815? But didn't the Treaty of Ghent, which officially ended the war, get signed in December of 1814? I'm a little confused about the timeline here.
That's the fascinating thing about this battle. It was fought after the war was technically over.
How is that even possible?
News traveled a lot slower back then. Word of the peace treaty hadn't yet reached North America when the Battle of New Orleans took place.
So both sides were essentially fighting a war that was already over. Talk about a communication breakdown. But even though it happened after the fact, this victory must have been significant for the Americans.
It was a huge morale booster, solidifying Andrew Jackson's status as a national hero and further fueling this sense of American exceptionalism that was emerging from the war. It was a triumphant exclamation point at the end of a long and challenging conflict.
So with all these battles, all this back and forth, who actually won the War of 1812? And what lasting changes came about as a result?
That's where it gets interesting. On paper, the Treaty of Ghent restored everything to the pre-war status quo. No territory changed hands, and none of the major issues that triggered the war, like impressment or neutral trading rights, were even addressed.
So all that fighting and sacrifice for nothing, was it just a draw then?
Well, not exactly. While the War of 1812 might not have resulted in any dramatic territorial changes, it had a profound impact on the young United States. In many ways, it was a victory for the Americans, not in terms of land gained, but in terms of national identity, political realignment, and future trajectory.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these less obvious but equally significant consequences of the war. How did a war that seemingly changed nothing on the surface end up changing everything?
One of the most significant outcomes was the surge in American patriotism and national identity. Having faced down the world's most powerful empire for a second time and emerged with their sovereignty intact, Americans walked away with a newfound sense of unity and confidence.
It makes sense. It's like going through a trial by fire and coming out stronger on the other side. But how did this newfound sense of national pride translate into concrete changes within the U.S.?
For one, it significantly weakened Native American resistance, opening vast territories for westward expansion. This tied directly into the concept of manifest destiny, the belief that American expansion across the continent was inevitable, righteous, and even divinely ordained, which gained incredible traction in the decades after the war.
So in a way, the War of 1812 set the stage for the massive westward movement that would reshape the American landscape and its relationship with Native American tribes in the decades to come.
Precisely. It's a complex and often tragic legacy, but it's a crucial part of understanding how the War of 1812 shaped the course of American history.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just westward expansion that was impacted. The war also had a seismic effect on American politics.
I'm ready for another one of those aha moments. What happened on the political front?
The Federalist Party, which had been a major force in American politics since the nation's founding, took a fatal blow. Their vocal opposition to the war was seen by many as unpatriotic, even treasonous.
So the war ended up fracturing one of the dominant political parties at the time.
Yeah.
That's a huge political shift.
It really was. The Federalists were essentially painted as defeatists who were more interested in protecting their own regional interests than in supporting the nation as a whole.
Right.
Their decline paved the way for the rise of the Democratic-Republican Party and ushered in what's often called the era of good feelings, a period of relative political unity.
It's amazing how a war can reshape the political landscape in such a dramatic way. But let's not forget about the economy. We talked about the British blockade earlier. Did that have any lasting effects on American trade and industry?
It absolutely did. While the blockade undoubtedly caused disruptions and hardship, particularly for those in New England who relied on maritime trade, it also had a surprising side effect.
I'm sensing another twist in the story here. What happened?
The blockade forced the U.S. to become more self-reliant. With imported goods, scarce American manufacturing actually boomed during the war. Entrepreneurs and inventors stepped up to fill the gaps, creating a surge in domestic production.
It's like that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. But I imagine this shift towards domestic manufacturing also had some downsides.
Of course. While it spurred innovation and created new economic opportunities, it also widened the gap between the industrial North and the agricultural South, a division that would eventually contribute to the tensions leading up to the Civil War.
Wow, it's fascinating to see how all these seemingly isolated events are all interconnected. The War of 1812 was like a catalyst that set in motion a chain reaction impacting everything from national identity to westward expansion to political realignments and even the future of American industry.
And that's what makes studying history so compelling. It's not just a collection of dates and battles. It's about understanding the ripple effects, the unintended consequences, the ways in which the past continues to shape the present.
So to wrap things up, if we were to distill the War of 1812 down to its most essential takeaways, what would they be?
I think the key takeaway is that the War of 1812, despite its seemingly inconclusive end, was a pivotal moment for the young United States. It was a coming-of-age story, a moment where the nation solidified its independence, forged a stronger national identity, and stepped onto the world stage as a force to be reckoned with.
And in doing so, it set in motion a series of internal changes that would fundamentally shape the course of American history for generations to come. All this from a war that on the surface seemed to change very little. It's a powerful reminder that history is full of these hidden complexities, these seemingly minor events that end up having outsized consequences.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of looking beyond the headlines, of digging deeper into the motivations, the ripple effects, the unintended consequences of historical events.
Sure.
That's where the real understanding lies.
I couldn't agree more. So for all of you listening as you go about your day, consider this. Could the iconic Star-Spangled Banner have been written without the events of the War of 1812? What other echoes of this seemingly distant conflict do you see in America today? The answers might surprise you.
It's a question worth pondering, because history, even a war that happened over 2 centuries ago, is never truly in the past. Its echoes shape our present in countless ways if we know where to look.
And that's what makes exploring these deep dives so rewarding. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep looking for those connections that weave together the tapestry of history